Murk Borg is a doom metal fantasy tabletop role-playing game by Pelle Nielsen of Occult Ort Mysteria Games, Johan Nor of Stockholm Cartel, and published by Fria Ligan, also known as Free League to those of us that are speaking God's tongue. This game's aesthetic feels inspired by heavy metal magazines, Mad Max, Ralph Steadman's artwork, and hyper-carnage shows like Adult Swim's Metalocalypse and Super Jail. You know this game is metal AF because it's pronounced in cursive and it uses these two dots above the O right here. Like, they commissioned a vinyl album soundtrack of industrial doom metal for an adventure, and then printed that adventure on the freaking cover, which you can use as a GM screen. Murk Borg vomits style. There's a lot to love about this rules-light TTRPG, but the book can be a bit hard to follow along with at first glance because it definitely isn't laid out like a conventional TTRPG. There's a bare-bones version of the game over on their website, available completely for free, but once you understand how the game functions and where to find the info, I think you'll come to love Johan Nor's graphic design artistry all over this book. To help out to this, once we get to the guide to playing this game, I'll include the page numbers for where you can find this information on both the full art book and the bare-bones PDF down here on the bottom right. Also, the game out of the box isn't really the kind of thing that's going to appeal to everybody. It's very all thrills, no frills in terms of the math nerd stuff. In the default setting of the Dying Lands, you're playing a doomed character living on the verge of an apocalypse. You won't be making a 4th level half-gnome transmutation wizard multi-class 2 levels in the divine chicken wrangler psycho warrior with the honey dipper job. You don't have a race, you don't have a background, classes are optional, and it's because of all this that creating a character in Murk Borg can be done in 30 seconds or a millisecond if you use their Scumbirther website. The developers embraced this and didn't make some fancy character folios, they made a character sheet tear-off pad that they've had trouble keeping in stock. Murk Borg can suit long-running campaigns, but people that want more involved leveling systems with some crunch may be found wanting here. When you drop to 0 hit points, there's no death saves. You got a 25% chance that you just die, and if you drop below 0, you do just die. It's not the kind of game that has tons of means of recovering your health or resurrecting fallen allies. If your character dies, it's time to roll up a new one, and that's not to say that this is a high-skill game with any kind of a get-good, gate-kept mentality. It actually has an incredibly warm and welcoming community, but the game knows what it's about. If the default Dying Lands doesn't really draw you in, there are several supplements that have dropped throughout the years that threw the Borg system into other settings. Cyborg entered the scene in November 2022 and has quickly been embraced as a major contender for the definitive cyberpunk TTRPG. It seems to be better at modeling the overall chaos of a show like Cyberpunk Edgerunners than the default like Cyberpunk Red TTRPG, which I've heard many people kind of compare to more of a sort of a Fallout survivalist feel rather than the sort of all crazy, almost like coked out cyberpunk world. I do have here, how appropriate, another one of these, Pirate Borg that funded over on Kickstarter that throws the players into a Doom Caribbean of eldritch horror. And just announced, I think this was in the last week, a Farewell to Arms, which is a World War I inspired Mork Borg hack that fully funded within 12 minutes. I'm also doing some research on a Borg hack of my own called Excalibur that I'm sure you all will be seeing here on the channel if you stick around. So that's my elevator pitch on the system. Now let's walk through how you're going to actually play this game, assuming that you're at least somewhat familiar with how tabletop role-playing games are played. So first off with character creation. The default for creating a player character is a 5-step process. Number 1, I'm going to list this here. I disagree with the way that they kind of had this organized in the book. Number 1, I'm just going to say straight up here, classes. This is expressed to be an optional rule, but I don't see many people opt out of it, and it feels way quicker to make a character. You can choose a starting class, which gives you set rules for starting wealth, a number of omens, I'll talk about that a bit more later on, your hit points, a short ribbon, your abilities, a loadout of equipment, and a unique class-defining feature. Omens are expressed as another optional rule that I still see people embrace more than buck, but if you're familiar with luck points in D&D, this is going to feel pretty much the same there. Omens allow you to have some sort of a slight influence on like altering a d20 roll, maybe negating a crit, things like that. But if you decide not to start here, you'll go to page 18 or 21 in the bare bones edition and just get into creating an adventurer. With the equipment section, you start with 2d6 times 10 silver, a water skin, and d4 days of food. You then roll for starting equipment using a d6 for a container or vehicle, and 2 separate d12 rolls for additional gear. Then you'll roll a d10 for a weapon, or a d6 if you got a scroll off of one of the d12s earlier. You roll a d4 for starting armor, or, like with your weapon, a d2 if you got a scroll earlier. You can then spend the silver that you rolled earlier at this point to also buy additional gear if you wish. From there, let's go on to abilities. So there's 4 abilities in Murk Borg: agility, presence, strength, and toughness. Agility is similar to dexterity. Presence is sort of like a general, like, mental, wisdom, intelligence, and charisma stat. Strength is strength, and toughness is similar to constitution. You roll 3d6 and can either assign them or roll it straight down the line. Once you have a number, you use this table I'll show right here to determine what the ability score actually is, ranging from a -3 to a +3. If you didn't take a class earlier on, you can roll 46 and drop the lowest die for 2 of these abilities. For your hit points, again, this is if you're not starting out with a class, you're going to roll 1d8 and add your toughness to get your hit points. You can't start the game with less than 1 hit point. Combat! Murk Borg is incredibly simple with its combat sim. We're talking about a skirmish-style initiative system here, and what this means is the party is going to act all during the same turn in combat against the opposition that also acts on their own turn, right? So it's just you all's turn, their turn. Yeah, we don't have a bunch of individual initiatives split up. If you decide later on that your party's having a hard time deciding who goes first or whatever, you can just assign that later on by like rolling a d6. Whoever rolls highest, sure, go for that. This leads to a lot of war table style discussion about who should be acting first during the party's turn, and gets the group thinking about the actions of the entire team rather than their lone character. To simplify this, for initiative, you're going to roll a d6. On a 1 to 3, the enemies are going to go first. On a 4 to 6, the PCs are going to go first. You also just flip a coin. Murk Borg is a d20 rollover system, meaning that rolling high is generally the good thing that you want. If you play D&D or Pathfinder, this is going to feel very, very similar, but the purpose of these rolls is going to feel slightly different. Attacks aren't made against armor class, they're actually made against a test, meaning that players are assumed to hit an enemy on a d20 roll of 12 or higher after adding the appropriate modifier, using strength for melee or presence for ranged, not agility here. That you're going to find out why here in just a second. Think of this more of like an accuracy test rather than an attack roll. Now, enemies on the other hand are assumed to hit unless players succeed on a defense test of like typically 12. Think of this like they're always making saving throws. We're taking a roll away from the enemies to see whether or not it hits and just kind of assuming the bad stuff is going to happen, right? Putting the burden of proof on the players actually does help to speed up combat. It keeps the focus on the player character, and it's going to keep the players engaged during the enemy's turn. So armor in this system is no longer making enemies less accurate, like with an armor class. It's actually making them less lethal. Armor reduces damage by an indicated die, as shown in the equipment section. Now, just like the world of Murk Borg, the magic system is also going to be a little bit dangerous here. Scrolls, as I had mentioned them earlier, are things that you can potentially pick up that in your starting equipment gives you access to certain powers. So you can think of it like this. Scroll more or less means spell in Murk Borg. You gain scrolls that unlock powers for your character, either through starting equipment or possibly by picking them up later on. You get a number of spell slots for the day each morning, equal to 1d4 plus your presence. And now whenever you activate one of these scrolls, you're going to test your presence, and if you roll a 12 or higher on the d20, after adding your presence, you successfully cast the spell and subtract that use. If you fail, you lose some hit points and can't use these powers for an hour. Now, there are critical hit and fumble rules to this system. It is assumed that you will be using these. I'm going to have those right here so you can check those out. I do like the idea of if you crit a nat 20 on a defense roll, you're going to get a free attack, like just almost like you're getting an opportunity attack, like in D&D. I'm like, yeah, that sounds so sick to me. Like, I love that active, oh, I can potentially get rewarded out of critically like hitting on a defense check. Yeah, it's one of the things that I think adds to the overall frantic, just high action of Murk Borg. So that's like a quick and dirty, get you at least like up and playing Murk Borg with the combat system so you kind of know what's going on there. In terms of the roleplay, most everything for Murk Borg's roleplay system is kind of just left up to your equipment and some personal flair that you're inspired to throw on the character you've rolled up. You might have some ability rolls, mostly using like presence for some face or like brain type situations, right? There are totally free subsystems that you can use to like supplement travel if your party wants to be more survival heavy like that. These are free, and there are some that are actually endorsed by the Mork Borg crew that you can go and check out. I'll have those down in the description below. Murk Borg is also showcasing some rules from some other TTRPGs about like interacting with the world with the reaction system, not like reaction as a part of the action economy. Reaction as in like whenever you first encounter another creature, what's their overall disposition, right? I personally don't think reaction is a great name for that, but Traditionally, it's just sort of what they went with. And then there's also a morale system in here where, as a GM, while you're running this game, it kind of gives you the like, oh, well, this thing is now actually just running, it's surrendering or doing something else, right? So the game is trying to help alleviate some of the like, I guess it's just piloting of the system on the GM, right? Now the GM can totally just decide like, we're just going to ignore this and do whatever, but it is nice to see that there is a system here that's in place. From there, it's basically like playing any other TTRPG. There's additional rules involved that are mostly GM facing and some world building stuff in the base book. So don't worry about those here if you're just trying to get in and play and understand kind of what the system is about. So hopefully this video gave you an understanding as to like how to interact with the game itself. And again, the links are going to be down in the description below. Check all that stuff out. I've really appreciated it. If you like what you saw here, leave the video a like, subscribe if you haven't already. I want to give a shout out to my Patreon sponsors. Thank you all so much for helping me keep the lights on around here and coffee in my blood. You all are absolute heroes. And hey, I hope you all are staying safe, staying healthy, and I will see you in the next one.